Let's get some of the lads together. Let's have a good idea. Okay, yeah, all right. Go on, fellas. Get around the piano. Let's have a good go. Come on, then. You ready? Come on, you lot. Go on, then. Oh, 'tis our delight for the red and white. The imps are here to stay. Oh, 'tis our delight for the red and white. The imps are here to stay. Lincoln City are the team, the Radiants is their name. Stinsel Bank is their home ground and football is their game. So come and cheer them on, you lads, support them all the way. Oh, 'tis our delight for the red and white, the imps are here to stay. Oh, 'tis our delight.
Now, this is definitely going to be a trial this morning. I need to know, the 7 of you watching early doors, so thank you. I need to know how I sound, because it's gale force winds up here in the Wolds. Usually that kind of affects the sound, so I'm just hoping that we're doing okay. It's just a quick dog walk, really, mainly because there was something interesting, and Kate, I'll come to you in a minute. Brilliant, thank you for that early doors. Something interesting yesterday. There was a Twitter account that asked which non-league teams would you support if you were if you're a football league fan, and I commented, I don't really like to support non-league teams. I had enough of that for 6 years in 2011. But, it was the usuals. But it got me thinking, everybody has a team, another team that they support. Now, I'm not talking, Helgi, welcome on board, mate. I'm not talking about other Premier League teams this morning, because I get that a lot of people have a Premier League team or something like that. I'm talking the obscure ones. I'm talking the teams that kind of, there's a bit of a story behind, and you'll go, oh right, support those, do you? And I'll come back to Kate. Actually, Kate has already come in and said I now also follow Tromsø in Norway and Sporting Lisbon from when I lived there. And that's kind of the thing I'm looking for. Like, you wouldn't expect somebody to be a Sporting Lisbon fan but also a Lincoln City fan, or you wouldn't expect anybody in the UK to go, oh, I follow Tromsø. And I'm not talking St. Pauli either, because it's really easy to go, oh, I support the anti-fascist team in Germany. Yeah, look, everybody does. We're all against fascism, aren't we? Surely so. So I'm interested to know who else you support. Now, I'm not touching on like other Premier League teams. It opens a can of worms. There's some people I know who kind of say, oh, you can't support 2 English teams. Yeah, I think you can. As a youngster, I did. It's a story I've told quite regularly. How I can't believe how windy it is. It's a story I've told regularly, but I'm a ginger. I've always been a ginger. And I remember when I first started school, I couldn't find my way out of the paper bag in secondary school, or even primary school, I think it was. It was after the Mexico '86 World Cup. Dad said to me, you're going to need to pick a big team. So he bought me my first sticker album, which was Football '87. I remember him putting it down and saying, pick a team from there. And at the time, my granddad, who was a Lincoln fan, and bear in mind I'd already been to my first Lincoln game at that point, and we'd been relegated actually, I think, for that year. I remember my granddad had taught his budgie at the time to talk, because you can't you? Your budgie mimics you a little bit, and occasionally it'll say something that sounds a bit like a real word. And Dusty would say Mick Harford, and I remember turning the pages, and Mick Harford was one of the stickers I'd got in my pack as well, and there he was, and it said Lincoln. I thought, I'm going to support them, and it was Luton Town. And it was a great season, actually, 87, 88, for me as a kid, because obviously Lincoln won the conference, Luton won the League Cup, and they finished, I think, 7th in what would now be the Premier League. So it's like, yeah, I was a winner. Not so much a couple of years later, and certainly not so much in 2019, where I saw one of my dad's old mates in the pub, and he was like, oh, Gary, how you doing? You're the Luton fan, aren't you? Oh, fucking hell. How's he calling me a Luton fan? Do you know what I mean? I can't let anyone in the pub hear that. So that's kind of, I get everybody kind of does have a second team. For the record, Luton are now not my second team anymore. I don't have a second team in the UK. I can't support another team who we may draw in the cup or we may draw in the league. I have teams that I like in the Football League. Yeah, I like Wimbledon, not when we play them, but I do like Wimbledon. Funnily enough, we've got Nat on this morning. Morning, Nat. Chef Wednesday. I've got a bit of a soft spot for Chef Wednesday, if I'm honest, as well. I think because that period in the early Premier League, like local clubs, were always seen as something to aspire to, and Sheffield Wednesday and Nottingham Forest were those as well. So yeah, I want to see those clubs do well. It pains me to see Forest not doing particularly well at the minute. And obviously, while Wednesday are in our division, I don't want them to, beat us, of course. But in terms of going up, I think they're a fan base that probably deserve it. So I get that. You can have respect for other clubs. But what about the bizarre clubs? So I'm quite interested to go back to Kate. So Colin Tromsø in Norway, Kate does. I'm assuming that's from a kind of a visit there, a holiday there, something like that. I've got one. I'm a big fan of Bari in Italy. Now, there's a story to this. So back in the day, my cousin still does actually. She married a Baresi, as they're called, a man from Bari called Mariano. Great lad. And when I went over there, he took me to the Stadio Santa Nicola, which is basically the St. Nicholas Stadium if it was in the UK, which was purpose-built for Italia 90. Phenomenal design, and such a design that it's like concrete all the way around, like a concrete bowl. But when it's bouncing at the top, you can feel it moving under your feet. It's quite scary. I haven't witnessed that. He told me that when I went. I think they were a little bit on their arse. They were in Serie B, relegated, if I remember, recently to Serie C, and now they're back at the top of what would basically be the second tier in Italy, fighting for promotion to Serie A, which would be fantastic because Bari are the south of Italy. For those who don't know Italy particularly well, is kind of what is regarded as not the poor region. You know how the south of England is like the rich and affluent region, and the north of England is the kind of poorer, more kind of traditional British kind of English region. And I think that's the way that Italy is. It's just topsy-turvy. It's the other way around. Charlie down there, good boy. So they're quite passionate about their football there. I liken Bari to kind of a little bit like a Newcastle United, like not now, but as they were a couple of years ago when they were in the Championship, like this huge club, couldn't be really well. They were really acting up. And also one of those sticker albums I had early on had foreign players, British players who were playing abroad in it. And they had Gordon Cowan and Paul Rideout who gone to Bari, and then David Platt went there as well. So yeah, I had a bit of a thing with Bari. When Mariano moved here, he lives over here now. They live in London. He moved over to Lincoln. He started coming to watch Lincoln a little bit with me. Is that not off-putting? Absolutely killing me here. So he started coming to watch Lincoln. I bought him a Lincoln shirt. And then for my 40th birthday, I think it was, he bought me a commemorative Bari shirt. So I always keep an eye out for them. I'm not the only Lincoln fan that follows Bari. Jeremy lives over in Puglia, which is the region of Italy that Bari play in. Often puts pictures on there on Twitter. So he's a Lincoln fan. He's Jeremy Bolin, Lincoln fan who lives in Bari a little bit. I hope he's one day to go back over there and watch a game. It'd be cracking to watch it. I think. So, Kate explains those of a certain age all have an Italian side after the division being on Channel 4 in the 90s. Good! So, I think we'll remember that. So, if you have an Italian team, do mention that as well. Forest, Tony and Payne for a season with Forest. I think Helgi suggested Forest probably do. Sure, this is exactly what we're talking about. Look out for Scarborough due to family members up there, and one of the cousins help out at the ground. I think that's a great point. And there is part of me that looks out for Exeter for the same reason. My uncle Keith was a Lincoln fan, lived in Lincoln, went to school until about the age of 14-ish, and then moved down to Exeter, watches them kind of home and away. He's up here for the Sheff Wednesday game. Whenever he does, whenever he gets up here, he comes to watch Lincoln. His first love, I always tell him. I think family ties are quite interesting. And obviously, Scarborough quite a good one to look out for with them being non-league, so there's no conflict of interest there. Cat says likes Marseille because of Chris Waddle, Sampdoria because of Des Walker, which I suppose plays a bit, doesn't it, into my love of Bari. Because it kind of when a player goes over to a foreign country, you learn more about their team. And by the way, that Marseille team that Chris Waddle played in, if I remember correctly, same one that had Jean-Pierre Papin played in it, didn't he, for a while? Was it Valderrama? No, Valderrama was at Montpellier. Yeah, for a while, the French league was. Marseille was such a good side. I remember the Champions League beating CSK Moscow, I think, about 6-0. And it was the first or second year of the Champions League. It hadn't been going very long. remember watching that and just thinking, wow, these are such a good side. So yeah, I seem to think something to do with corruption ended up there as well. Obviously, Waddle and Des Walker both players as well. So yeah, good shout out. I like that. I'm starting to distort a bit apparently, so my apologies. So Keith says Tromso was simply because I bought a random player from them on Football Manager in 2009. I started getting interested in them. Then went to a game there in 2015 against Jondalen, probably 1,500 miles for a 0-0. Well, I think that's probably a rosette that you can wear, a medal that you can wear, Kate. I think that's quite something. Football Manager is a really interesting way to get into teams as well, isn't it? There's obviously David Johnson, our American, one of our American supporters who discovered Lincoln City on Football Manager and has, was got quite a bit of coverage when that was first announced. He wants to come over and watch us, and he still obviously is a Lincoln fan. Still kind of subscribes to the Patreon, all sorts of stuff. So I think that's an interesting way of finding a foreign team. And for a short while, I actually quite like Lecce. And again, they're from the south of Italy as well. And that was purely because I used to try and pick colours that I liked. And the two combinations that I really liked on Football Manager were blue and red and yellow and red. I really like those combinations for shirts. So I think that was quite interesting. I'm going into a dip in a minute, so hopefully this wind will die down. Nana says, I watch a few home games for my local team, Wakefield AFC. The team only started in 2019. And again, I think it's good when you can follow a local team or a smaller team. Up until recently, I was going to watch my nephew play for Fishtoft, which is kind of right at the bottom of the scale, like an under-13s team. But again, when you're in Louth and you kind of have no connection to Boston, I suppose that's one to call. Sunday League as well, big fan of rugby, and my mate Chris manages. So I just think it's interesting. And I think it poses the question about kind of football being both tribal and being something that you can enjoy as a standalone product. I can't understand somebody who says I entirely support, let's say, Lincoln City and Man United. You support one more than the other. You do. So for me, you support one and follow the other. And the easy way to think about it is, what would you do if, let's say you're Leeds and Lincoln. What would you do if Leeds played Lincoln? Which end would you go in? I'm not talking about ease of tickets, talking about by choice. Which end would you go in? You would cheer the goal for one more than you would for the other. It's inevitable. It's inevitable. People who've got two kids, no matter what you tell me, you like one more than the other. Inevitable. You've got to. You've got to. Preference. You like one biscuit more than the other. You like one town that you stayed on holiday in more than the other. Nothing is ever dead equal. So I think if you support two teams that could meet each other in cup competition, I think that could be a challenge for some. And I'm not criticising anyone who has two teams. You're doubling down. My old man had two clubs growing up, Chelsea and Lincoln, and it was brilliant for him because when Lincoln was shite and Chelsea were good, it'd be all about Chelsea. And then when Lincoln won, you wouldn't hear about Chelsea. It was, for him, I think it was like a comfort thing. And he followed Chelsea from the 1970 FA Cup. After they won the FA Cup, he was 16, something like that. He'd watched Chelsea on telly. The FA Cup final was the only real televised football at the time. And, he kind of really bought into that Chelsea team and followed Chelsea. And he passed that on to my little brother. And I kind of don't pass it on to anyone. And when Lincoln and Luton met, it was a friendly. It was about 89 or 90. I remember I got all my Pro Set cards ready to sign. The only one I got was Alec Chamberlain, and I've lost it since. But I got all my Pro Set cards out. I remember waiting for all of the players to come out, and Alec Chamberlain came over and signed it. Or I was in the Lincoln end, and I remember just thinking, I want Lincoln to win this. And that, for me, that was the end of it. It's like, I can't support two teams the same. And I still flew the Luton flag a little bit during early part of secondary school, just so I could join in with conversation. Do you know what I mean? Just so because people weren't interested in Lincoln. You couldn't get Lincoln City Pro Set cards, so you couldn't swap them. They weren't really in the news. Nobody gave a shit about Lincoln back then, not like they do now. So it was almost like a mask, I think. But I do think it's possible to enjoy football, wider football. And I think things like Football Manager have really helped that, haven't they? Because Football Manager gives you the opportunity to kind of dig into teams and these surprise shirt packages. Love them or loathe them. I know some people don't agree with them because it's kind of turning a secondary profit. It's like a reseller almost, but others think it's a great way to explore football shirts. I've had one or two kind of gifted to me mainly. It's a way of finding out about another team. I must admit, I showed zero interest in looking into the Turkish second division or whatever it was that I got the shirt from. And so it's not for me, but it is a gateway for people to find other clubs. I also couldn't just pick a big club, I don't think, from a foreign country and go, I like them. I think like Nat has with Chris Waddle and Des Walker, there'd have to be a connection, there'd have to be a reason. I can't just go, I really like the way Barcelona play football, so I'm going to support Barcelona, because the connection isn't real, it isn't there. And I think, you know, I would have more connection with Ostuni FC, who play, I think, in like the fourth tier of the Italian game, which is really watered down, because I visited their ground. Or Sorrento, I went to their ground when I went on holiday. I always make a habit of hunting out the ground. And as soon as you've been somewhere, as soon as you've seen it, you kind of get that connection. And that, again, that kind of goes to Kate, doesn't it? Kate's been to Tromsø. Kate's been to Sporting Lisbon. So she feels that connection with that particular club. And that's where it becomes important. I know this isn't exactly an engaging dog walk, but I just found it fascinating. I think football supporters fascinate me immensely, and kind of the behaviours and the attitudes of football supporters. And I think there's kind of a really deeper thing behind it. And I think these days you can see the real surface level support, which is on Twitter, you know, where every knobhead's got an opinion and you get to see that opinion. I'm not talking about post-Lincoln games, people disagreeing. I'm talking about things like football Twitter, which was another thing on tweet yesterday, and things like ratio and stuff like that. Oh my God, do you know what I mean? That sort of football really gets on my tits. So there's this real sphere of real base level, just idiot football fans, you know, who think Man United is the only team in the world, and they, you know, oh, you're a small club and all that, and they don't get it. They don't get it. A lot of that is modern football. Thanks to the Premier League and the money and the sensationalism and the, you know, the excessive coverage of top clubs, and wankers like Mark Goldbridge devaluing and debasing kind of everything that's real in football. Oh. And then you've got people like Kate, who live 20 minutes from the Sporting Stadium, or people like, here we go, Steve Bond, who follows Yusufa Gamigals, because where we got Gisbos from, no idea how to pronounce it. Me either, Steve. You'll obviously understand that from what I've just said. You know, it's a real connection because it's born out of your love of Lincoln City, or it's born out of somewhere you've been. It's personal, and that's football to me. It's personal. I love Lincoln City. Why do I love Lincoln City? Because the football's great? Not really. Up until the last 5 years, we've probably been fairly shit for the entire 36 years of me supporting the club. And it is 36 years, by the way. Today, it's 36 years. Today, 36 years ago, I went to my first Lincoln game. So for a majority of that, for maybe 28 of those years, we've been rubbish. What did we have? 5 decent, maybe a bit more, maybe 23 years we've been rubbish. I support Lincoln City because it's family, it's community. Things build up. It's sometimes the worst thing about having been to watch Lincoln, certainly in the past, was the football, was actually going to watch the game, because everything else was good. You turn up, you meet your friends, you talk to my old man about it afterwards. Yeah, I identify with something, I belong somewhere. That's football, not Mark Goldbridge going on about his shit on the television, or not, you know, some random guy, that Thogden prick who started at Bolton and then goes to follow England and does all his videos. You're not a Bolton fan, mate. You're not covering Bolton. It doesn't feel like there's a passion for Bolton there. There's a passion for you there. And that's what a lot of modern football is. And that's why I like it when people come up, like kind of saying things, you know, like I support Yusufa Eagles or Tromsø or Bari, or there's a good one here from Nat. Again, thanks for engaging that. I think documentaries on teams nowadays help you form a bond with teams, and they do. I'll build into that in a minute. You watch a documentary and you think, I like this team, or I like what they've tried to do. There's a good one about I can't think which international team it is now. One of the Australia international teams, they lost like 26-0 or something. There's a great documentary on them. Really good documentary on the iPlayer about Derry, who I kind of half keep an eye out for now in the Southern Ireland League. Derry City have got a brilliant story. If you haven't seen it, go and watch it. You won't fail to be engaged. You know, and then there's other fans of We like Drogheda, don't we, Lincoln fans now? I keep an eye out for Drogheda because obviously Sean Rowan and Sam Long went there, and Sean Rowan's come back a great player. And just going back onto what Nat said there about documentaries, before Netflix and the accessibility of documentaries, it was books. Now I remember reading a book called Pointless about East Stirling. You've got to read it. And I don't even know if East Stirling exists anymore, which shows you how much I pay attention to kind of Scottish football. Every time I picked a Scottish football side, they disappeared. I used to like Meadowbank Thistle because they played in yellow and red. They've gone. Then I liked Clydebank because they had a white kit with kind of red and black shorts in one of the sticker albums. And I thought, yeah, I like that. They've gone. And then East Stirling, I read this book, and you can't fail. You read this book about East Stirling, honestly, it's hilarious. Like a striker who, I seem to remember, he wouldn't play at certain games because it was too far for him to go and come back again. Just great times. And those are the stories that appeal to real football fans. You wouldn't get your Mark Goldbridge coming back saying, oh, I've read a book on East Stirling, or I've watched a documentary on Derry City, because he hasn't got it in him. I know this sounds like a bit of an attack on Mark Goldbridge, but it's what him and his kind of stand for me. Do you know what I mean? And he's actually, from what I understand, the two-team wanker. He sits in his Nottingham basement doing his Man United stuff. And I know proper Man United fans who despise the man. But it's just, I don't know. I think that's the difference, isn't it? You get these people, who do you support? Oh, like Paris Saint-Germain, Barcelona. And do you know what? If I ever started a conversation with somebody, who do you support? And they listed two teams in the same division, for me, I just shut off. You don't like football, do you? It's like saying, oh, I'm into food, I'm into dining. What do you like? Big Macs. Oh, cracking. Yeah, nice one. Yeah, we'll have a conversation about that. Fuck off. So James Bride, he's been to Derry City a couple of times. Great club. Yep, it's a great story, James. I don't know. I'm assuming you've seen the documentary. It's just a fantastic story about, obviously the troubles in Ireland and how it affected the city of Derry and the community, and how them kind of bouncing back. And I think they played in let me get this correct. So they're in Northern Ireland, but because they're on the border, they were able to play in Southern Ireland. And I think it was, I might be wrong, I think it was Derry City we signed Ocean Gallagher from. And part of the problem we had was that they're in Northern Ireland, but they play in Southern Ireland. So technically Gallagher should have been subject to the rules from us bringing players in from the EU because they play in Southern Ireland. But I think that we had to go to FIFA to say, well, hang on, they're based in Northern Ireland, so we should be able to bring him in. And that kind of got me thinking. It got me looking and digging for these stories. It got me looking for the Derry City story and the documentary. In a couple of weeks' time on FA Cup first round week, hope we're drawn away. Me and Chris, my mate Chris Lamming, rugby manager, we're going over to watch St. Pauli away at Dusseldorf in the Bundesliga 2. And so I've got the book, Pirates, Punks and Politics, to read through, just to kind of get a little bit of background on St. Pauli. And I understand they're a fashionable club for people to like. They're very anti-fascist. They're very, alternative. They're an easy club to support. I can't claim that I do at the moment because I haven't read the book and haven't been to see them. I like what they stand for, and you go on that journey. And that's what I think, to round off, because I'm coming back into the windy bit, a really non-Lincoln City video here. And I appreciate the 20 odd of you that have stuck by and watched. I hope you've enjoyed the conversation. But that's what I'd urge anybody to do, is go out and find out about other clubs. And Bry Fox has come in. He's been to one foreign ground, which was Stuttgart, so they'd be the second team, if any. And again, it's that link, isn't it? Been there, you've seen the game, and so you kind of almost half follow that side. But I just advise anybody to not just be kind of tied. I'm not saying tied to Lincoln City. You're a Lincoln City supporter, or you're a Sheffield Wednesday supporter, it's not. You're a Leeds supporter, Liverpool supporter, whatever you are. But football throws up so many wonderful, amazing stories, and there are so many great clubs out there, and there are so many examples of the good that football has, not the bad, not the foreign ownership, not the, I hate the Premier League, I despise the Premier League. Recently, I've watched a little bit. I've watched a few kind of late stages of games. I watched a bit of the Man City Man United game, and the product's brilliant. I hate everything it stands for. I hate everything that it stands for. I hate everything the Champions League stands for. But yeah, they're such a small part of football. Such a small part of football. The wind is terrible. My apologies. I really urge people to go out and find those football stories. Find the Derry Cities on St. Pauli's. Find your Bari, your Thompson, your Sporting Lisbon, whoever you play as on Football Manager, and enjoy enjoy. I don't know, it's just such a diverse world. It really is. I had some interesting tasks a couple of weeks ago with my job, whereby I was writing for a company who wanted me to write in foreign language sites. So I had to change all the settings on Google. So to search for like Italy, for instance, I wrote about some Italian clubs. So I was searching Italian language sites in Italy, and then I was converting them into English. And then some of them are a tough read, but there's some brilliant stories there about, Serie D teams, Serie C teams, teams that have risen from the ashes. Pisa, Siena, really interesting stories. Bari, interesting story. Who were the ones that have just been promoted to the top flight? I can't remember now. But there's a team that kind of have crashed all the way through, and those boom or bust stories are really good. Livingston was a really interesting story from back in the day. Gretna Green was an interesting story. They're brilliant. East Stirling, Pointless, if you'll find the book, do. Monza, they're the ones. Monza, says James Bryden. I think, haven't they just sacked their manager and they're looking at bringing somebody else in? But Monza, brilliant story. Harry Jackson, Lincoln Red Imps in Gibraltar. Yep, brilliant. It's a great example. It's someone that I always keep an eye out for when they're in Europe. And again, because of the whole Lincoln City connection, it's a good choice. And Carl Mercer's, forgive me, because it won't show me all of this message on the screen. In late 80s, I supported Borussia Mönchengladbach due to be stationed in Germany. I now follow them. I also follow Juventus. As a photo of me in my Lincoln shirt. Surrounded by Juve fans in the Stadio della Alpi, hanging in a hotel in the Asano. Decimo, thanks to my friends Olgo and Diego. Oh, so he's hanging, sorry, I get that. Wherever I've been, I've proudly worn my Lincoln colours. I think I've influenced others to have an interest in our team. I know for a fact there are two chaps who have, I can't actually see the rest of that, unfortunately, it won't show on the screen. But again, they're brilliant stories. Brilliant stories. I'm really interested in German football. I like the way that the German fan culture operates. I like the way the German clubs are run. I like it almost feels more like a democracy. The German top flight feels like there's fan ownership. It feels like there's fans have a say. Our national games got away from us, and it started in the Premier League. It's now seeped down to the Championship, and I genuinely believe that it's beginning to creep into League One now as well. When you look at the top end of the table, it's not just the teams that are there, but certain teams in our division are overspending in order to try and get out of the division, and it's just beginning to filter down further and further. And it's a little bit of a shame, because part of football in England no longer feels real. Certainly in the Championship, you see the boom or bust. In the Premier League, it's just abhorrent. So anyway, look, thank you everybody for joining in this morning. I hope you have enjoyed a slightly non-Lincoln City chat, and I hope that you have a good Wednesday. This week we've got another League One roundup planned from Samuel Rowson. It'll be his last League One roundup this week. Next week he's going to start picking up the opposition reaction articles like the Bolton one that we did this past couple of days. So there's that to look forward to. It's Ben and me on the podcast this week, so we'll be recording that tomorrow. There's an article coming up that I'm working on, a Lincoln City Prison 11. Found 11 former Lincoln City players who spent time in the Slammer. So I've put those into a team. I'll be presenting that to you later on in the week as well, along with all the usual build up to the game against Charlton going into the weekend. So I hope you all enjoy the rest of your day, and I'll speak to you soon. Cheers.